Here's a bonus to the bonus of Stoicism. It's a discussion of skepticism and its leader in the academy, Pyrrho. The term skeptic comes from the Greek word skeptikos, which means an inquirer. And it ends up developing as its own parallel branch, and by the early 3rd century AD, becomes a dominant force in how a Stoic should look and approach the world around them as well. The real founder of skepticism is a man by the name of Pyrrho. He lived 360 to 270 BC. You'll notice that this isn't too terribly much later than the life and impact of Zeno. Zeno was 336 to 265 BC. They would have likely known each other, and their philosophies would have engaged with one another, and Pyrrho would have gained from the work of Zeno and what the idea of wisdom would be. Indeed, this is why these philosophical schools are really two sides of the same coin. There's a lot of different stories that emerge about Pyrrho, and we're not sure if all of them are accurate. One version of the story says that he went with Alexander the Great to India, and here he was influenced by Indian skeptics, quote, naked wise men, usually identified as Hindu Brahmins, but more likely probably Jains. Now, it's also very much possible that this was an account that was made up later to hinder or help his reputation, depending on the audience. In any case, Pyrrho ends up posing some questions of anybody. It says, if you want to be happy, you have to consider 3 questions. The first is, how are things by their natures? How are things? What attitude should we adopt towards them? And finally, what will the outcome be for those who have this attitude? No, he thankfully doesn't just ask these questions, but he gives us the answer. We could agree or disagree with them, but he gives it to us. To the first, he says that nature is indeterminable. Humans have no access to truth, so the best thing to do is to refrain from judgment. Now notice this is against basic Stoic cosmology as well. Right? That said the universe is knowable, but Pyrrho says, maybe not, a little more indeterminable. No, shouldn't be too certain. As such, the attitude we should have towards things is that they both are and are not. Right? That we should refrain from saying anything beyond this, that refrain from any assertion is then going to be freedom from disturbance. That's all we can say, is that things are and are not. And the more I want to say things are one way or are not one way, the more disturbed my own soul and my own life will be. And finally, he says that if we adopt this as an attitude, if you internalize this attitude, you will be free from the anxieties that trouble everyone else. The best way to do this, he says, is to limit attachments or beliefs. Right? Cut off attachments, cut off beliefs, and then you'll be free from them. You will not be in error. Into the 2nd century BC, we have a man by the name of Arcesilaus, who maintained that if wisdom is incompatible with error, this basic teaching of Stoicism, then as Stoics will maintain that the best thing to do is to abandon all judgments. That this is what we need to do. We need to abandon all judgments, because any of our judgments are likely to be in error. Then you'll be free from the anxieties that trouble everyone else. Around the year 200 AD or so, there was a new rise in the interest of what Pyrrho and the earlier skeptics did. A new school of thought will emerge, and these people will be known as neo-Pyrrhists or new skeptics. The main leader of this was somebody by the name of Sextus Empiricus. And he says that if we are to live a normal life, it means that we must subscribe to a fourfold rule. Right? The way our normal life should be should follow this basic sort of understanding. He says that we have thoughts and feelings, which means we need to accept guidance from nature. That we need to eat when we are hungry and drink when we are thirsty, or constrain our desires. Right? Don't just eat to eat, right? If you're not hungry, don't eat. If you're not thirsty, don't drink. What are your desires? If they're not in line with where things are, don't do them. Right? This is the second of these. We need to accept the laws and religious practices. In other words, you're a part of a society with social tradition and social ideas. Be a part of that. That doesn't mean that you're going to hold them all as true, but it's how you need to operate. Because to refuse society is not necessarily accurate either. There's value in what the generations before you have said, even if they might be wrong. And finally, that we need to engage in creative activities, right? There must be instructions in the arts that you need a creative outlet for your life, and you need to be engaged in producing something. That we need to limit our mental life to the appearances. He says you do not need to make statements about things being naturally good or bad, existing in this way or that way, but rather try to think of cure to all of those ungrounded doctrines, right? If you can think of a cure, if there's a cure that exists to a doctrine that doesn't have any real reason to it, then fix that. Don't reject all systems, but question them, right? And this is much more the idea that we have about a skeptic, right? An inquirer, somebody who's looking, somebody who's questioning something, not just rejecting everything, but asking, okay, if this is true, then why? And what should we do with it? Skepticism will grow and dominate the Stoic Academy as well. The Academy will grow from Stoics, but is for a while run by skeptics. As earlier mentioned, it was once said that if wisdom was incompatible with error, the best thing to do would be to refrain from all judgments. And the third head of the Academy for the Stoics, a guy by the name of Crispus, 280 to 207 BC, expanded logic and advocated for the suspension on judgment. And this happened even more under Carneades, 214 to 129 BC. Carneades said that we have no notion of real truth, but only apparent truth and apparent falsehood. We cannot be objectively certain of things, but only have a convincing appearance of truth. This ends the control as Stoics then attack those who think what cannot be known. It was also very important for skeptics to not be wrong. And this is the notion that's being advocated here. We don't want to be wrong, so we're going to hedge our bets. We're going to say that something has the appearance of truth, because it does. It might be false, but it has the appearance of truth. So we're going to operate off of this way. Skeptics are not going to destroy everything, but they're going to test it. They're going to poke. They're going to prod. Again, following that Greek term skeptikos, they're going to inquire and look. And this becomes the central idea of skeptics as the other side of the coin to Stoicism.